So there's some very serious genetic thing going on here.
If that's true, then there really is no general population. We basically find the majority have either this sensitivity themselves or related to it.
33 to 40%.
Well, what about what you just said about the
No, that haven't actually had a test or been treated by anybody. They're part of the 33.
There's sort of no general population left after this.
No, the general population is between 60 to 67%. They're talking about people that are related, that are probably, because this is genetic, that are carrying this defect. That's within that population. They're not talking about people without it, they're comparing it to people without it. Not everybody has this.
So what's the diagnosis rate right now?
It's relatively low. Most people are walking around without the diagnosis. And one of the problems was that blood tests were notoriously inaccurate, and people were not convinced that why people were coming down with cancers and neurodegenerative diseases had anything to do with gluten. Most of the doctors had no training in this, and they were using the transaminase blood test, which could pick up maybe 35%. Then they came up with other tests, like the ones I use with patients, and they were at best 65% accurate. Because
I guess just plotting over the last 15 years the belief about what fraction of people are gluten intolerant. Well, okay, now we have another data point, but if I sort of plot this out, it's going to converge to saying 100% of people shouldn't have gluten.
No, they actually said no, because they tested people that are fine with gluten. Particularly blood type A's are much more likely to be okay with gluten, because they had that allele, that mistranscription that allowed them to adapt to it when they were farmed. So unless there's some cross-genetic, the A's. But the people that come from the older genetic types, no.
I'm sorry, I sort of didn't get that. The A's are more sensitive to gluten?
No, O's are.
The O's are, oh, but we are A's, so.
Well, there's a lot of, it's not, if you have it, you have it.
Yeah.
But it's less statistically likely to have it if you're an A.
Oh,
There's no pure genetics anymore, we're all inbreds.
Well, with the long half-life of recovery, any level of exposure is likely to lead to cumulative debilitation,
Right.
which reflects the digital nature of your statistics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because I'm kind of on Bernie's side. There's no such thing as digital in nature. You know, you get 100 molecules of gluten, it's going to make a pinhead-sized dot on one spot in your intestine.
Okay.
And if you were able to truly limit yourself to that, then that would be relatively minor impact.
No, that's not what they found.
Well, I think, okay, I'm skeptical about the way the data is presented, not about the data itself, but about the way it's presented.
Well, the Mayo Clinic is now the world's experts on this.
Okay.
And they changed a few months ago.
Yeah.
Saying 1 milligram is enough to set it off if you have the sensitivity. And they've taken away the other definitions. So celiac disease now means that your intestines are affected. Gluten sensitivity means the rest of your body. So you can have both celiac disease and gluten sensitivity.
But the fact that you respond doesn't mean that you don't respond more if there's more.
Yeah, it depends on these other factors, which I haven't gotten into.
Yeah.
Some people are going to be gluten sensitive, and they're just going to have some discomfort. But what they found, even if they only don't have overt symptoms, that their death rate goes way up. They have
just a purely and simple correlation, gluten sensitivity mortality rate, regardless of the cause of mortality.
When I took the class he had with the computer, and he kept flashing, "Don't forget, this is killing people." And then he would give the data, and he kept flashing. He says, "I want everybody here." And interesting enough, I was only the one of 2 people there in this big thing that didn't raise their hand, that didn't have themselves. Everybody going there had a gluten problem.
But since you were talking about mortality rates, it takes some years to establish those properly. We only change the understanding of when this kicks in, so I don't think there's been enough time to actually establish actuarially whether that's what's happening. There hasn't been enough time.
You'd have to read the papers, and I only read the summaries. So, but that's what, and it's not one paper, there's a lot of that going on. So that's the Mayo Clinic's data that they've correlated from many
And there
places.
seems to be a little bit of suspicion about the logic. I mean, apart from the paper themselves, the logic says that you can't establish mortality rates in such a short time scale, especially correlated with something that's only recently, like in the last year or two, and shown to act this way.
The last year or two would be when papers have been published based on the research that's been
That's done in the last 20, 30 years.
been going on.
They went back and looked at large patient data over decades.
So,
I'm only presenting the information, this is not my,
It's
No,
more
but
that they
the
wouldn't be
reason I
able to-
brought up Bernie's perspective is because I really wanted to hear your response, you know.
yeah. I mean, Bernie was right where I was at. And actually, I can remember because I was referred a child with very severe symptoms that I've been working with. And her pediatrician diagnosed her with gluten problems. And when I did her test, the gluten level antibodies was low. Now, so I told them it could be just a protein reaction and that she might outgrow the gluten. I hadn't taken the class and read the material. Now, what they said at the conference, that if you have any antibody level, you're gluten sensitive. And it's a genetic reaction. So what happens, and we have the scans, I mean, I saw the scans, you have the data, you have that literally the villi die, and so you can't absorb the nutrients that the villi would take it in, because right now we understand that each villi is specific to a specific nutrient. And each one of us is designed for specific nutrients. And that if we ingest something that we're not designed for, it sets off aberrant autoimmune response.
so you get a dead zone or zones of villi.
Yeah.
Those are breeding grounds for invasion
And bacteria.
of hostile
Pathogenic
bacteria.
Yeah, they have
And now, let me ask you this. It is clear that different people will have different levels of sensitivity and will have, therefore, different reactionary times and responses.
Right.
Apart from just an overt pathology,
Right.
which is like a long-term cumulative response, what are the initial indications of the sensitivity? Are they something you can sense in yourself, or do you have to get tests done for it? Or both?
Well, let's go over the test, because I can't answer the first question without answering the second question.
Okay?
I told you about the problem with the testing. There wasn't false positives, there were only false negatives, that people were underdiagnosed because they didn't have a reaction to the most common gliadin. So the test would come back that they were fine. Now they know that we have, at least that have been identified, over 100 different types of gliadins.
Of what?
Gliadin is a type of protein that's
Okay.
part of gluten. And so they're waiting for FDA approval, but the tests do exist that will be able to now measure up to 100 to see if you have an antibody response. So the point of doing those tests is if you have a negative response but you have symptoms. Now the symptoms that people have at first, and then you're celiac, so what are the symptoms when you get exposed? And you're healthy.
Floating is
One of the common things.
nausea and diarrhea and
Gas.
So really ostensible, not subtleties.
No,
These are
no.
things like, just stand right up in front of you.
Right.
yes, but so typically for me certainly one crumb would be plenty to keep me away from work for a week.
Oh, wow.
When did that show up?
It gradually developed over a while, and then in my 30s, basically over a span of a couple of months, went from a minor irritation to being unable to function.
Oh, so this isn't like you're uncomfortable. This is you're
I would
debilitated.
commit suicide.
Ah.
Yeah.
So you didn't know as a child, you had no symptoms?
No symptoms at all as a child.
But a lot of people
And what
just
blood
have
type are you?
unexplained.
A+.
Now, this is
A
very
plus?
short term, this isn't a 2.5 year phenomenon, this is a 2.5 hour phenomenon.
This is, the response is typically at the next meal.
Yeah, hours.
If I don't eat anything, I have no symptoms.
Well, he has celiac disease. Gluten sensitivity could affect other areas, not necessarily the gut. That's changed. So what happens, people who have long-term exposure, they develop, and this is well documented, some people come down with mental conditions, they get diagnosed as schizophrenic, they get diagnosed as bipolar, some people have anxiety disorders, some people come down with arthritic conditions, because you remember the body's first response is inflammation, and inflammation that can get into the brain will bring on neurodegeneration. What they didn't know, what was the precipitating factor.
Yeah, I guess what I'm reacting to here is a guy who is, a person who is extremely sensitive is probably on the luckier end of the spectrum than somebody that has to wait a year or two for long-term cumulative effects that are deeply ingrained in their physiology.
Right.
So you look at it that way.
Oh, it's the best thing that ever happened to me.
Yeah.
No, what was the best thing?
Celiac. 'Cause
So the
now I
blood
eat
type?
healthy.
You said there
What
were
did
crowd
that say?
fixing that.
Yeah, he had a gut reaction, so that was easy for him to see.
Yeah,
Other people might not have a gut reaction.
Exactly.
They can have a mental reaction.
Like peanut.
Yeah, and a lot of people, what they're finding now, and there's piles of papers, you can't even read them all, on neurodegenerative diseases mimicking other diseases that are coming from the gluten, because it's toxic to the nervous system. So, remember, the key thing to understand is that we have genetic memories in our villi specific to certain nutrients. We don't have these memories for nutrients or false nutrients when we get exposed to them. And the same thing with the xenohormones, which are foreign hormones that mimic natural hormones.
So the blood type gives you a clue of probability?
Yeah, but only on a general nature. I wouldn't, not on a specific person.
Or cilia, it doesn't,
No,
no.
you can't do. You'll have, statistically, more people with O's will have it than people with A's. But that,
Generalism.
but you can't go by that with a specific patient, you go by the patient. The way it used to be taught is that you go abstinence for 3 months, and if you feel better, then you have it. But that's no longer valid. So that's the way it used to be. Now the new research says the repair takes, depending how bad it is, and you have to have the right repair. There's things, I'm not going to go into tonight, but there's dense prolines that repair the damage to the brain, and that there's other nutrients like L-glutamine and combinations that repair the tight junctions. So, but those take, according to the research, about a year to 2 years. So if you have a mild damage, about a year. If you have significant damage, they say 2 years.
So can this villi damage be physically determined via biopsy?
Yes. Well,
If you have a good doctor.
you're a good doctor, but if you want to put yourself through that, you can do scans on it. You can see those in scans. But if you're having symptoms that are debilitating and degenerative, you don't need to do that. I mean, if you already have the test, you don't need to put yourself through any invasive test. It does damage.
I'm thinking if by chance you have a colonoscopy, that can be just part of it.
No, it's a big thing because they have to cut off some of the test, and cutting it off does damage.
Even colonoscopies have a certain percentage of intestinal wall rupture.
Yeah, you're going through, people go through denial and with these things, and the truth is hard. Trust me, it's hard for me emotionally to realize this, that what we're doing, what we've done to each other out of ignorance. And at least we're starting to recognize how pervasive this damage is.
I
And
don't imagine that any companies like Monsanto attend those conferences and try to think about how they can better their products.
I don't know, I didn't meet anybody from Monsanto, but what I did meet was a lot of physicians who was surprised because he asked, how many people here know they have gluten problems? So the people tending to be treating these things are the people that have it themselves.
Yeah.
There was only 2 of us that didn't raise their hand. So, but what I got out of it was there is no, you either have it or you don't, and the level of damage is on other factors and how long you can go without doing irreparable damage. So the tight junctions are what protects us, and that when they open, all kinds of viruses, bacteria, fungi, chemicals go into the blood. And once it's in the blood, we have no defense. And that changes the neurological function. So remember, our line of defense is your gut. So to handle these things, you can't